Hello everyone, welcome to Wisdom Loop. I'm Shaheen Ighanyan and with my good friend Hardik. It's an honor to have you guys with us in another show. You probably remember, if you watched any of my introductory videos, you probably remember that we're starting a few episodes in a series of talking about Malcolm Gladwell. Because he's a very talented writer and journalist. He writes for the New Yorker. And he also publishes his own books. He has his own podcast, and he has very good, interesting ideas about life. We will be talking about the Outlier story of success. Personally, it's one of my favorite books because it gives you ideas that you normally don't hear when it comes to how to become successful, especially if you want to achieve higher level of success. It's one of those good books that make you feel good, and maybe I talk about that a little more as we go along.
Sure.
Hardik, welcome. It's good to have you again.
Thanks for having me, Shaheen.
Sure. Why don't you open up, tell us a little more about maybe Malcolm Gladwell in the beginning or Outlier?
So, I mean, there's two kinds of authors. There's books that are written by authors that are professionals in a certain field, and they dedicate their lives to doing a lot of research, and they come up with a unique idea that changes the way humanity views a certain aspect. Daniel Kahneman is an example of that. Jared Diamond's an example of that. Then there are other authors that have a variety of books, and instead of going really deep, they give you an interesting spotlight on different ideas.
I see.
I think Malcolm Gladwell falls into that category. But he does it with almost incisive depth.
Right.
So he'll give you a lot of depth really quickly, and he'll instigate thought. So it's not so much that I subscribe to all the ideas Malcolm Gladwell has, but Malcolm Gladwell's ideas have helped me, have provoked
Opened up
me.
new windows.
Yes, they've provoked me into researching certain aspects that I wouldn't have even thought about before. So I think it's a good start. His book Outliers, he talks about the factors that build success. And it's a great thought because everybody's thinking about success. They're thinking about their own self-development.
Sure.
They're thinking about, like, what can I do?
Yeah.
And this book kind of gives you ideas on what can you do, but what can you also do as a parent to prepare your child.
Right.
So it's a great, if you're a parent out there listening, I think this will be great for you. If you're someone who's interested in public policy, it might be great for you. And if you're just generally interested in success, I think you'll enjoy the book. There's a lot of statistics that he uses behind it as well. So if you're mathematically or scientifically inclined, you'll like this book.
What I personally like about this book, aside from its very elegant prose, I think he uses the techniques of storytelling very, very well.
Absolutely.
And aside from that, I remember when I was growing up, sometimes you try to do something, it doesn't turn out to be successful, or you compare yourself to somebody. Let's say you compare yourself to Bill Gates, and somebody tells you, hey, you're never going to become Bill Gates. But then, you feel a little bad about yourself, thinking that there is no opportunity for you to become Bill Gates because you're not just as smart. What Malcolm Gladwell does, he tells you that it's not only about you.
Right.
One example that he gives you is not only about the tree. If a tree happens to grow tall, it happened to be in a forest that was a lot of supportive aspect in the forest.
Right.
Good soil, not a lot of competition to access sunlight, and a lot of nutrition. So it's what Malcolm Gladwell does, looks beyond the individual and looks at the environment and the culture, even birth date that we will be talking about.
Absolutely. I think if I had to summarize a book in a sentence, I think I happen to read quite a bit. It's one of my bad habits, so to speak. And so my wife will often ask me, she'll say, summarize this book in one sentence because I don't want to hear your speech on it. Because she's tired of hearing my speeches. So I'll try to summarize an entire book in one sentence. So for this book, I would say it's, the story of how extraordinary success was built by people who grabbed extraordinary opportunity with both hands in an environment that supported them.
Exactly.
In an extraordinary or unique way for that time.
Exactly. I have a quote from his book actually that gives you a good idea of his approach. He says, people don't rise from nothing. They are beneficiaries of hidden advantages and opportunities and cultural legacies that allow them to learn and work hard and make sense of the world in ways others can't. And he also says this book is not about tall trees, it's about the forest.
Yeah,
So-
I think that's a great segue into getting into this book. So I think this book is divided into 3 parts. It's opportunity, or the presence of opportunity. It's debunking the idea that you need to be born with extraordinary intelligence or extraordinary talent to be successful, or that success is embedded in your genetics. It gets
Yeah.
away from that idea, and then it talks about cultural legacy. So I think the quote you shared highlights those 3 aspects. And so getting into opportunity, I think part of what Shaheen and I wanted to do with this book is to provide you with concrete examples, because what we see in a lot of book reviews is a general discussion of ideas without any concrete depth into the examples provided. So the idea is that if you listen to us today and you take the time, you'll not only get specifics from the book, so that if you don't read the book you have an idea of its content, but if you want to read the book, you'll have an idea of exactly what you'll be covering and what you'll be going deeper into. So to start with, I guess he talks about opportunity in areas that we might perceive to be meritocratic.
Mhm.
So he talks about the Canadian Hockey League,
Yeah.
which is very meritocratic in most people's eyes. And he looks through the different teams that have been successful.
Yeah.
And he says, well, if you look at the birth dates of all the players, they all happen to be born, predominantly at 75% or higher, happen to be born in the first 3 months of the year.
Yeah.
Why is that? Is there a bias here that we're not seeing? And he kind of drills down really in an interesting way, and he says, well, the selection, these kids have been playing ice hockey since they were 10 years old. And the cutoff for selection in one of the minor leagues is the age of 10. So if you're born on January 1st, which is the cutoff, you have a 12-month advantage over someone who's born in December.
Exactly.
And when you're a prepubescent 10-year-old, that 12 months developmentally is huge. It's a
absolutely.
chasm.
Yeah.
And it allows you to be bigger, faster, stronger,
Mhm.
perhaps have 12 months more of training and experience,
Yeah.
which as a percentage of total playing time at that point is 25% higher than your peers. And it basically exposes you as a star to the coach who's looking at it and saying, hey, this guy is much better.
Yeah.
I got to give him the best training. I've got to give him more play time. And it creates a compounding effect. It creates
Absolutely.
a self-fulfilling prophecy
Yeah.
that allows these players to reach that top level. And this is not to say those players were lazy. It's obviously
Yeah.
not everyone who's born in the first 3 months that gets to make it. That's not the point he's trying to say.
Yeah.
He's trying to say that you have an advantage.
Exactly. In the time period in life that makes a big difference, being like 7 or 8 months older, physically and emotionally and mentally makes a huge difference that puts you at a level higher than other classmates or teammates that you can achieve more. It's somewhat like the investment that we talked about in the first episode. If you invest early, whatever you invest in a child early, like investment that you do in stock market,
There's a compounding effect.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Very similar idea. So for parents out there, you might obviously have control of when to try to have your child to be born.
Mm-hmm.
You can take control of that. But Malcolm Gladwell also talks about happening to be born in an era like Bill Gates, or other people that happen to be born in an era that just by sheer luck happened to be a perfect time for being at the dawn of computer age.
Right.
That's one example. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
We'll definitely talk about that. I think one of the ways Malcolm Gladwell tries to quantify this aspect, because this is just an example that you might not be able to apply to everything else. One of the ways he tries to quantify it is he says, you need 10,000 hours of practice to achieve mastery of a skill, to achieve world-class mastery. He talks about violinists, about pianists, about hockey players. He's like, anything that you're passionate about doing, where you're, and this is important, where you're learning deliberately to improve. You're not just doing it because you're forced.
Yeah.
So if you're doing something deliberately to improve your craft, something you're passionate about, it takes 10,000 hours to achieve mastery.
Yeah.
And to break that down, let's say you do something 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, that's 2,000 hours a year, so it takes you 5 years to achieve mastery. If you have a full-time job and you're doing it 20 hours a week, it takes you 10 years. 10 hours a week, 20 years. So on and so forth. And the other aspect is the presence of superior opportunity. So if you're not born in Canada, if you're born in an area that doesn't have snow, but you have like the height and the speed or the agility of an ice hockey player, you might never have access to that opportunity. So I think those are the two factors where we get into examples like the Beatles, them playing in Hamburg for 8 hours, 7
Yeah.
days a week, year on year.
And having the motivation to be there because of the nature of their work, having
Absolutely.
access to the drinks and a lot of other things,
Yeah.
the motivation and the luck to be in that position to perform every night for long hours
Right.
brings them up to skill that's unmatched with any other
Right.
band.
I think you find examples of the Beatles, you find examples of Bill Gates and Bill Joy actually as well, who a lot of people have not heard of, is not as popular as Bill Gates.
Yeah.
But Bill Gates and Bill Joy had similar stories where their educational institutions had access to computers that were well ahead of their time, that were one of a kind in the entire nation, and it allowed them to become familiar with software in a manner that it wouldn't have been impossible otherwise. And as Shaheen mentioned, I think you make a very brilliant point that there were other people in that high school who had that
Yeah.
opportunity as well.
Exactly.
But it was Bill Gates who shone forth, and that's where I think talent comes in. Talent, I think, is just the ability to dedicate yourself to something
Right.
for hours on end without it feeling like work. And I think
Yes.
we've all had this feeling. There's one thing we can do forever and ever, and we're like, oh my god, the time just went by.
Yeah.
You could almost say that we have a talent to pursue the excellence in this field.
I guess for people like Bill Gates, for example, the chance for him to have to be born at the right time, and also coming
Right.
from a wealthy family to be able to support having him program in the library for hours and hours and hours
Right.
while his classmates were playing outside doing
Right.
other things, gave him a combination of factors that helped him, rise to the level that he did and become successful and gain the skills that nobody else had in that time,
Right.
and very few had it.
I think your point about errors is really something Gladwell touches upon as well. So he talks about how if you look at the tech luminaries, the technology luminaries we look up to today, they're all born within 6 years of each other.
Yeah.
Bill Gates, Steve Jobs,
Exactly.
and a number of others. I think Larry Ellison's there too. And similarly, he says, you make a list of the richest people of all time, and you kind of inflation adjust their earnings, of course, you can compare them. And you're left with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like
14 Americans.
14
that-
Americans born between 1830 to 1840.
Yes.
The
1831 to 1840 to be exact.
Yeah.
Because in 1860s and 1870s, building railroads and emergence of Wall Street
Yeah.
created a lot of opportunity to become
Opportunity.
rich. And these people just happened to be born at the same time. I mean, again, this is not something that nobody can foresee the future,
Right.
thinking that what is going to be up and coming in such and such age. So I'm going to have my child to be born in this day to take advantage of that change. So this part of it just has to do with luck. These people were just lucky to be born, but they were smart enough to take advantage of that luck. They were smart enough to seize the opportunity that time was giving to them to take advantage of the railroad and revolution in transportation, and also Wall Street, and in case of Bill Gates and other people that were around the right age in 1975 to take advantage of the dawn of computer revolution.
Right, and I think what we're trying to do in this first part is not to say that these people don't deserve their success or they didn't earn it.
Yeah.
It's saying that they had a disproportionate advantage being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And now we'll discuss what factors about them personally made them great. And this is the part that a lot of people are interested in. We often think of people who've succeeded as being extraordinary intelligent or geniuses in some way. This word
Yeah.
genius gets thrown out a lot.
Exactly. That's a popular narrative.
Yeah.
If you pay attention to politicians,
Yeah.
almost all of them, mostly in democracies, what they want to relate to people that they're hard workers, they're self-made people, they came from poor families, they had to work really hard to make their way up to the level that they are. Gladwell says it's not the entire story. It could be part of it, but it's not the entire story. And there's some hidden factors that might be even much more important than the just the hard work of the person.
Right.
That's what refers to forest when we're talking about an example of tree. So just one more thing I wanted to mention, going back to Bill Gates and his success, was the support of his family. He came from a wealthy family, but his family knew that he needed financial support to be able to continue programming and become masterful at that. So.
And just delving deeper into what Shaheen just mentioned, there's a study of a professor who was obsessed with this idea that IQ could predict success. And so what he did was he gathered a cohort of, I think it was 750 children or something, with above average IQs. We're talking genius level IQs. And he tracked them for 25 years. So we're talking about, really focusing on where they went to school, how they educated themselves.
Yeah.
And he was kind of disappointed because on average, the success he predicted for them didn't materialize.
I think he was thinking that higher IQ automatically
Would be
translates to higher
correlated
success.
with higher success, and he found that that was not the case. And delving deeper into his data, he looked at the top third of performers in that data, and he found that they are, PhDs. Some of them are Nobel Prize winners. They've done really well. They meet every box. They check every box for what you would define as success in the conventional sense. And then he's like, why is my average being driven down? So he focuses on the bottom third, and he finds out that these are people with broken families, poor background, poor access to healthcare. Not a supportive emotional environment to grow up in, that kind of deprive them of the soft skills needed to progress. And I think he gives you this example of Chris Langan, who had the greatest IQ of any person.
He's known to be
he was known to be able to read books in half an hour and have this prodigious intelligence. And he says, that guy didn't really make anything of himself because he had emotional issues.
Exactly.
And you talk about Robert Oppenheimer,
who
comes from a
he was a
privileged
troubled kid. But like you said, came from a privileged background. Even though it seems like he wasn't as smart as Chris Langan, but he happened to make his way through life and become I think he was the manager or the head of Manhattan Project.
Right.
So, actually, Malcolm Gladwell does a good job comparing these two.
Right.
And the background, and just showing that how much being born in a family that knows how to coach kids. Malcolm Gladwell calls it concerted cultivation, meaning that when you're going to doctor with your child, preparing them to ask questions, not to be afraid of being in an environment of doctor's office. Take charge, ask doctor questions. This takes work of parents. They have, ahead of time they have talked to the child. So we're going to doctor. Do you have any questions? What are you going to ask him? Or what is it that you want to mention to the doctor? You mentioned to us that you had headache in the past. Make sure you bring it up. So a lot of these kids are not scared of authority. It doesn't mean that you're rude, but they're not scared of authority.
Their sense of identity is really well developed.
Exactly. I've noticed that for the nature of my work. I can see that when kids from middle class families come to my office, they're not afraid of speaking up. They're not afraid of questioning. A 6-year-old girl actually one day asked my credentials. That's something. And she actually asked me, what is your degree? So she wanted to know if I'm qualified to give her an eye exam. So it is a huge difference. And also sometimes you see kids from poor families, parents don't even look at you, don't make any eye contact with you. They don't ask you any questions. They leave the entire exam up to you.
They have this aura of deference that the child picks up on, and it kind of makes them. I think they almost feel like they don't deserve, they don't belong, and it's this insecurity that it's almost. I think there's a lot of documentation to support this with oppressed societies in general. People who face oppression in any society always live with this fear of this could be taken away from me at any moment.
Right.
Whereas people who are born with a certain amount of privilege or support or whatever you want to call it, they feel like, hey, I'm entitled to this. Not in a negative way, but they feel like they deserve respect. They assert themselves and they demand it almost, and that makes a lot of difference.
What Gladwell says, a lot of people from poor families, they are afraid of authority. They just don't think they are qualified or they're supposed to speak up or ask. Just because somebody's in the doctoring room, they think they shouldn't be asking. Maybe they're scared of looking dumb. Maybe they don't want to ask something that sounds dumb. But like I said, in parents that come from middle class families, this is already built in. They know that child has to engage with authority. They shouldn't be rude, like I said, but they have to have the sense of identity and know why they're there and how they can make the most of that out of that visit. So that is in relation to comparison between Chris Langan also and Robert Oppenheimer. Even Chris Langan has one of the highest measured IQs. I mean, he lives an ordinary life, and that tells you something.
Right.
That high IQ, if it's not cultivated, doesn't translate into anything. You might become famous for, like you said,
right.
being able to finish a book in half an hour, but doesn't mean anything in the real life. You're not going to make any changes because it wasn't cultivated.
Right.
So,
I think this kind of leads into his third aspect, which is legacy. Legacy, which is deeper than just your family. Maybe it's cultural. And he talks about, for example, the Jewish tradition in New York, and how these families really inculcated the idea in their children that, hey, we've faced a lot of oppression, we've survived a lot of hardship, and these children saw their parents work really, really hard on a daily basis, and they recognized that to kind of build their place in the world and achieve, a stable lifestyle, or achieve just get food on the table, they'd have to work really hard, and so that work ethic was inculcated in them,
right.
and they just recognize that whatever they do, they have to work really hard.
Yeah.
Giving up wasn't a choice for them.
Exactly. Related to the same story, Gladwell says that maybe luck was also part of what happened to the success. Because he said European Jews were not allowed to own land in Eastern Europe. So they were all handymen. They knew how to use their hands, and like in producing things, I don't remember right now. And he said when they came to New York, that skills were lacking in New York.
Right.
So they were able to put that towards building the business
dominate
and
those areas.
Exactly. And became successful very quickly. What else?
Well, I guess he makes an interesting point about certain skills. So I think oftentimes people have this tendency to say, "Oh, I'm a creative person. I'm not good with science and math. I think in an abstract way, so I'm not good at specific."
I've heard that a lot. Yeah.
So I'm a left brain, right brain person, which has been debunked, I guess, but people still try to use that as an excuse. And I think
I'm not just good in math.
I'm just not good at math, or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm not good with numbers. That's what they say.
Yeah. And I try to tell people there is no such a thing. If you, you can discuss the blank slate if we're all born with a blank slate and we can cultivate whatever we want. That's a somewhat separate issue. But from my perspective, if you put your heart and mind in anything that you want, you can become equally good, given that, again, the supportive environment is provided for you.
I think what we're trying to say, to be clear, is obviously there's a difference in talent. There's going to be some people who are going to be better, some people who are going to be worse. But I think what Gladwell looks at is test scores from students in China and in America. And we know there's no genetic difference. But test scores on average, so it's not saying everyone in China is smarter, it's just saying test scores on average in China for mathematics and science-based subjects are higher. And he delved into that, and he found out that doing tests with children of the same age group, it wasn't that Chinese students were much smarter, they just didn't give up as fast as their American peers.
Exactly.
And he thinks the reason for that is this cultural legacy of in China, a lot of the farming culture had this quote they used to share: "No one who can rise before dawn 365 days a year fails to make his family rich."
Exactly.
So it kind of gives you the sense that look, our legacy is of farmers who strive day and night. Farming is a very involved. It's not a 9-to-5 job. It's a 24/7 job. So it was almost like you have to try till you succeed, and that's the only way. There's no option of failure.
Yeah,
but that
you put that mentality to anything, you're going to be successful. He gives an example of this nursing student. I don't know if you remember. He says this nursing student tries to make sense of a slope of graph.
The exponential.
Exponential. And she just cannot get it. She doesn't understand it. But she doesn't give up. She spends 22 minutes, and it finally clicks. And Gladwell says the difference. So this is the quote related to the story I told you. He says success is a function of persistence and doggedness, and the willingness to work hard for 22 minutes to make sense of something that most people would give up on after 30 seconds. So that tells you just the mentality that you won't give up until you solve the problem. versus somebody who looks at something for the 30 seconds and says, okay, I'm not just made for this.
Right.
Solve it for me.
In fact, I wanted to share a story from one of my
Yeah.
colleagues. He's actually really brilliant in certain things that he does. And one day I asked him, I said, how did you get so good at this? And you must have been really talented in this field. He's like, you know what? It's actually the absence of talent is the reason I'm good at it. And I was like, that makes no sense. Because he was defining talent as innate ability at that point.
Right.
And he said, look, I realized that to be good at this profession, I needed to be good at this aspect of the job, and I was really bad at it. So what I did was I kept trying and kept trying, and I understood it at a really fundamental level, base principles, and then I realized why we have certain rules, why we have certain laws, why we use certain methods, and I was able to reinvent them to suit myself better. And so now people look at it and say, oh my God, he's a genius, he must be talented. But really it's because I was so bad that I had to learn, I had to deconstruct and learn from base principles all the way up. I think that's a really powerful idea. Yeah. Once it clicks for you, once you actually understand something because you've spent a disproportionate time understanding it, you appear to be a genius to other people.
Yeah.
Because people haven't seen the hard work you've put in to get there.
Yeah.
So you appear to be a genius because as you compound your knowledge, the difference between you and a layman becomes so vast that people almost need an excuse to explain it. Otherwise, it's almost like you feel bad yourself, right? You're like, this guy must have something special, otherwise I'm doing something wrong.
Exactly.
Kind of thing, you know?
So to expand on the idea of how important culture is, Gladwell brings few examples. One of my favorites is the story of a bad record of Korean airline. And many crashes that they had in certain period. Of course, they have turned that around completely right now. But in the past, the problem Korean airline, and they couldn't figure out why Korean airlines have so many crashes. And then I think they hired some Western, and then they realized it's completely cultural. And they looked at some incidents and listened to the conversations in the black box, and they noticed that since there is a hierarchy of a cultural hierarchy in Korea, it's a very strong one, and people in lower levels, they're not expected to speak up
or challenge
their superior. Many times when the captain in the airplane was doing something wrong, others around, even though they knew something was not right, they didn't speak up.
Right.
And
if a pilot was fatigued or unable to perform at his fullest, a subordinate that was his sole purpose was to check the co-pilot in case such a thing happened, was unable to check. And Gladwell goes through transcripts of conversations before a crash to kind of parse through the social dynamic that was disadvantaging these airlines. Yeah. And it's a lot of frankly just racist commentary from the West said, South Koreans just don't know how to fly planes. Yeah. But it turns out their pilots were just as good. Yeah. Their capabilities were just as good.
Exactly.
It was just this cultural barrier that in this particular profession created outsized risk. And so oftentimes when we hear of somebody say, hey, it might be cultural, we instantly think, oh, this is a racist comment, or this is a comment that's insensitive or meant to attack, when really it could just be highlighting an aspect of a culture that works really well in one aspect, but can create a disadvantage in the other.
Yeah.
And it's similar to how Chinese children are taught to strive harder.
Exactly.
It's a cultural aspect. It's nothing to do with genetics or...
Absolutely. Another example that Gladwell gives is about culture of honor and people that come from some states. And he says that even if you are raised in other states, let's say northern states, but your background comes from Kentucky, from the South, the culture of honor and sensitivity to certain remarks remains in you. And they did some studies in that. And they noticed that people that have their background coming out from the South, they're more sensitive to certain feedback. And that's amazing because you never notice as a person who has a background coming from certain region, with certain culture, that it could affect you in the future on your performance.
Right. I've noticed this in people from the subcontinent as well, Indian people, I think Persian people as well, Pakistani people. There's a culture of honor. Like if you say something about somebody's background or somebody's family, they take it really personally. Yeah. Where someone from the northeast of the United States they probably get hurt too, but they don't take it as personally. They don't have a visceral response. Exactly. This is where Gladwell argues, people from the South, people from these areas in the world, where there's a culture of honor, even though they don't subscribe to it, they're second generation or third generation, they have this embedded in them that, they respond disproportionately negatively to
Exactly.
feedback about it.
Gladwell actually delves much deeper into this than what we are doing right now because of the time. He talks about the background of people that from Europe and places in Europe. He traces them back into Europe, in Spain and stuff like that, and how they lived there. And he tells you the culture of honor is rooted in generations back in Europe that was carried over to the United States and the States.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting.
It's very interesting, the story tells. What else?
I think it's, I think we've covered most of what was in the book. I don't know if you have something that I've missed.
The only thing that I have in my notes I want to mention is that, of course, schools are important. The quality of education that you get in schools are important.
Mm-hmm.
But Gladwell also mentions that biggest difference between reading skills of poor kids and rich kids actually doesn't come from difference in school. It comes from what they get at home. He
the
says,
time their parents spend with them in the summer as well, because if your parents are busy working in the summer, you're not learning, you're wasting your time. Whereas in a wealthier family, you're actually being coached in the summer, and he was able to show the jump in scores for comparable students, based on who studied during the summer and who didn't.
Exactly. So basically, the main difference between kids from middle class and poorer kids doesn't come from quality of the school, even though that is important. Most of the difference comes from the coaching that they get from home.
Yeah, I think he was trying to explain the variance. So he said if the variance is, let's say, 30 points, 10 may come from the quality of the school, but 20 comes from the coaching they get at home.
Yeah, exactly.
So he was trying to say it's a disproportionate impact. And I guess what Shaheen and I wanted to do as well is oftentimes we have a book review, we listen to a book review, and it just talks about the book. It doesn't talk about the reception of the book, it doesn't talk about the criticism the book has received. And so we wanted to discuss that and kind of put this, frame this book or contextualize this book in the broader context. I think from my standpoint, when I was reading up on the reception, it was critically acclaimed, people loved it. In fact, the 10,000 hour rule comes out of this book. That's one of the most popular ideas. To achieve mastery, you need 10,000 hours. And I think if there were to be a criticism, I think Gladwell's view on success is what he's trying to identify are the factors that result in a world-class success. Or world-class competence. It's almost, you shouldn't be discouraged if you're not looking to become Bill Gates. Exactly. It doesn't talk about everyday success, because we all know someone who did just well for themselves. They provided for their family, they live a happy life, and they might have seen their success starting at the age of 40, not at the age of 10.
Right.
So we see these people, and we think they're part of the 1%. And if you look at 1%, it's not, the threshold isn't as high as you would think. Some people think being part of the 1% means making $1 million a year.
Right.
When that figure nationally is closer to 250, I don't know the exact number, but it's closer to 250 to like $350,000. So the threshold for what people call successful can it can surprise you that it's not that hard to be everyday successful, but it is really hard, and you do need a lot of support if you're going to become world class.
Interesting thing about Outliers is that even though you're right, he says that his goal is to study outliers, but meanwhile he still talks about Chinese kids being good in math.
Right.
He still talks about those things that
he tries to generalize. Even though he's talking about outliers, he starts to try to bring it out and generalize. I think that's where it breaks down a little bit. Right?
A little bit, But I prepared some quotes from his book, from the message that he tries to convey to people. I like what he's saying here. He says, success follows a predictable course. Outliers are those who have been given opportunities, either by luck, like birthday and culture, and we're planning like concerted cultivation. This was from in practices, and who have had the strength and presence of mind to seize them. So that we talked about. The other quote is, to build a better world, we need to replace the patchwork of lucky breaks and arbitrary advantages today that determine success, the fortunate birthdays and happy accidents of history, with a society that provides opportunity for all.
No, I agree.
So that's the most important thing. If just imagine if a lot, like as opposed to one kid or two kids having the opportunity that Bill Gates or Steve Jobs had, you can expand that to every child. If you can cultivate, and that might be impossible to have every little kid having the opportunity that Bill Gates had, but if you can have that mentality in our education system, trying to provide every child with as much opportunities that is possible in their field and support them. In other words, give them the soil, the high quality soil that the tree needs. You get a much better society in the future. You're gonna end up with many more Bill Gates and Beatles and Steve Jobs than just one or two in every centuries. So I think that's the most important message of the book.
And I think if you look across history, the reason the United States has had the advantage in innovation is because we have, we can criticize our institutions here and we can talk about how they're deficient, but relative to the rest of the world on average, they have been better and they have resulted in better outcomes.
Yeah.
And so we have a chance to keep it that way and make it better rather than regress to inequality. And we're seeing, I think, a rise in inequality. That's a political issue. We don't want to get into it. But,
maybe we'll talk about that later. Anything else left on your notes that you want to talk about?
I think we've covered pretty much everything. I think one last thing to note is that Gladwell talks a lot about skill-based professions that are heavy on skill, and he doesn't address service-based professions where relationships matter, where your network matters. But I think he does talk about how if you're coming from a privileged background, the high school you go to provides you with a stronger network to build those relationships. And it's tougher for somebody who's coming from a background where their network might not have anything to do with the professional career they have in mind. So I think there's more flexibility on how to achieve success than Gladwell shows, especially moderate success and not outlying success. So this book shouldn't be a discouraging, it shouldn't be something that discourages you if you're looking to change your career path or do something different, and you shouldn't look at this and say, hey, I can't put in 10,000 hours at this point. It should just serve as a guideline. A guideline, maybe.
Alternative idea. So I would say the take-home message from this book is that, first of all, don't ever compare your kids with anyone else. That everybody knows this is wrong. This is obviously this is wrong.
Mom, are you listening? No, I'm just kidding.
And number two is provide your kids. Don't rely on, just don't encourage the hard work. You also have to be supportive and give your child as much support as you can give. And then you can expect them to build on that support. The more support they receive from you or from the educational system, there is more they can do with hard work with that support. If there is not much enough support, the hard work just goes so much. And that's pretty much it. And, that, I guess for a practical lesson from this book for everyday life is just to provide your children with as much support as you can. This is probably the most important thing.
Absolutely. And we definitely recommend that you buy this book if you like this content and you actually read through it, because it goes into a lot more depth than we've provided. But I think what we've tried to do is give you a good kind of, it's almost like a tasting menu of what's in the book.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So it was good talking to you today. Thank you for spending your Sunday with us. We are planning to review a few other books of Malcolm Gladwell because he also proposes other very interesting ideas in his other books, David and Goliath, Blink, What the Dog Saw, and I think he has
Tipping Point.
The Tipping Point. These are good books, and we are planning to review them for you, and hopefully we will have you with us in those episodes as well. Hardik, thank you again.
Thanks,
you made this really much more rich. So we will see you guys soon. Have a wonderful day.